The private hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of machines and the faint rustle of curtains swaying in the air-conditioned breeze. Richard Lowell lay motionless in the bed, his once sharp features softened by months of stillness. 3 months had passed since the accident, a late-night drive in the rain, a slick curve, and a collision that had left him in a coma. Once a powerful and reclusive millionaire, he now seemed like a fragile shadow of the man the world remembered. The newspapers had moved on, his business associates whispered about succession plans, and even his family's visits had become rare. But every morning, without fail, a young nurse named Emily Parker walked into his room with the same quiet determination as if today might be the day he woke. Emily was only 24, still early in her nursing career, but she had already earned a reputation among her colleagues for her patience and gentleness. Many on the staff saw coma care as routine: feed, turn, clean, monitor, but Emily believed in more. She believed in dignity. She believed in speaking to her patients as if they could hear, in treating them not as silent bodies but as people still holding on somewhere deep inside. When she first met Richard, she had been told he was unresponsive, unlikely to recover, but something about the way his hand twitched once when she adjusted his blanket made her feel otherwise. Her days with him followed a careful rhythm. She would start by opening the blinds just enough to let in soft light, then speak to him as if greeting an old friend. "Good morning, Mr. Lowell. It's a sunny one outside today. I think you'd like it." She never expected him to answer, but she always hoped he might. She would then prepare warm water and fresh towels to bathe him. It wasn't just about hygiene. Emily knew the human touch had power. She would wipe his face, wash his hair, and even massage his hands and feet gently, keeping his skin healthy and blood circulating. Other nurses sometimes teased her. "You talk to him more than to anyone else on the ward," one would say with a smirk. Emily just smiled. "Maybe he hears me," she'd reply. She had read studies about patients who woke from comas recalling voices, scents, and touches from their caregivers. She couldn't bear the thought that Richard might wake one day and remember only silence. In those moments, while the world outside rushed on, Emily would tell him stories. She'd talk about the hospital garden blooming with roses, about the stray cat she had been feeding near the back entrance, about her younger brother's piano recital. "Your family brought lilies yesterday," she said one afternoon, gently dabbing his arm with a sponge. "They smell nice, don't they?" She paused, half expecting nothing, but swore she saw his finger twitch. She told herself it was just a reflex, but deep down, she wanted to believe it was more. The days blurred together. Her care for him became as natural as breathing. She began to feel connected to him, though she had never heard his voice. She wondered what kind of man he had been before the accident, whether he had been kind, stern, or somewhere in between. She had read enough about his wealth to know he could have hired anyone to care for him privately, yet here he was, in a quiet corner of the hospital, far from the glamour of his past life. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the routine broke. Emily was leaning over to wash his face when she felt it, the faintest, almost imperceptible pressure on her wrist. She froze, staring at his still closed eyes, then looked down to see his fingers curling weakly around her hand. Her heart pounded in her ears. "Mr. Lowell," she whispered. There was no answer, only the faintest flutter of his eyelids. She set down the towel, leaning closer. "Richard, can you hear me?" This time, his eyes opened just enough for her to see pale blue irises, unfocused but alive. He blinked slowly, then tried to speak. The words came out as a rough whisper, barely audible. "We're here." Emily's throat tightened. "Every day," she managed to say, her voice trembling. Alarms were triggered as the machines detected his sudden movement. Doctors and nurses rushed in, but through it all, Richard never let go of her hand. Even as they checked his vitals, shone lights in his eyes, and spoke rapid medical jargon, his grip remained, a silent anchor between the world he had been trapped in and the one he had just returned to. In the days that followed, his progress was astonishing. Though his muscles were weak and his speech slow, Richard was determined. The medical staff called it a miracle recovery, but whenever someone used the word miracle, Richard would shake his head. It wasn't luck, he'd say softly. It was her. When he was strong enough to hold a conversation, Emily asked him what he meant. He told her, haltingly, about the fragments of sound and sensation that had reached him in the darkness. "I remember your voice," he said. "I couldn't move, couldn't open my eyes, but I could hear you. I knew someone cared enough to stay. That's what I held on to." News of his awakening spread quickly, and soon reporters began circling, eager to tell the story of the millionaire who had come back from the brink. They wanted to know about medical breakthroughs, about advanced treatments, about cutting-edge care. But when they asked him directly, Richard gave them a simple answer. A nurse bathed me, spoke to me, treated me like I was still alive, and I woke up. When he was discharged from the hospital, Richard tried to thank Emily in the way he knew best, by offering her a generous sum of money. She smiled and shook her head. I didn't help you for a reward. I'm just glad you're here. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Then let me help you. Emily hesitated, unsure of what he meant, but a month later, she found herself standing in a newly renovated wing of the hospital. Richard had used part of his fortune to create a foundation dedicated to the care of patients with little or no family support, people who, like him, might otherwise have been forgotten. Emily was appointed as its director, tasked with training staff in compassionate, human-centered care. It became more than just a project. Together, they transformed the quiet, sterile ward into a place filled with warmth, walls painted in calming colors, soft music drifting through the halls, volunteers reading to patients, art from local schools hanging beside medical charts. Emily insisted on personal touches for every patient, family photos on the bedside table, fresh flowers when possible, favorite books within reach. One evening, Richard walked into the ward to find Emily sitting beside an elderly woman in a coma, speaking softly as she bathed her hands. It was a mirror of how they had first met, and it stopped him in his tracks. When the patient was settled, Emily joined him in the hallway. You remind me of someone, he said with a smile. I learned from the best, she replied. They stood together, watching the ward hum with quiet life. Richard spoke after a long pause. You bathed me when I was nothing but a body in a bed, he said. But you gave me more than care. You gave me a reason to come back. Emily's eyes softened. And you reminded me why I became a nurse in the first place. They both knew that the miracle wasn't just in the waking, it was in the months of unseen effort, in the belief that even the smallest acts could keep hope alive. The hum of the machines seemed gentler in that moment, blending with the sound of distant laughter from the volunteer room. Outside, the night was settling over the city, but inside the ward, the lights glowed warmly, and life, fragile, stubborn, miraculous life, went on. Some miracles, they both knew, didn't happen in blinding flashes or with grand gestures. Sometimes they happened slowly, one bath, one story, one gentle touch at a time. And sometimes they began not with medicine or technology, but with something far simpler, a human being who refused to give up on another.